It is my privilege that we can continue our study in the book of Job. In our last hour, we saw that suffering does not affect only the one who does it. Suffering does not affect only the offender, but it affects those who are involved in that, what the offender is doing to, and suffering also involves those who are not involved, because everything in this universe of God is bound together with the cords of love. That's why those who are not involved are full of pity and sympathy, and they suffer with those who suffer. So let us look once more to see who were the participants in the suffering in the book of Job. Suffering comes from the offender. And who is the offender in the book of Job? It is Satan and his helpers, also Job's friends. Who are those that are involved? Who are the parties that are involved? It's Job himself, his wife, his children, servants, friends, animals, his whole environment. But only they? No. There is pity and sympathy of those not involved, and that is the whole heaven. God and the universe are there and watching and sympathizing, suffering with those who are involved in the suffering. Now, we want to come to see what is Job's greatest pain. Before we read his lamentations, before we read his speeches, we need to understand, how was this man suffering? And we go through it step by step. The first thing that Job had was he had a maximal possible suffering in his body. That is, his physical gave his spirit such a great suffering that I think was maximum. So from his disease, from the dysfunction of his body, from his boils that were hurting and itching, he had that what does not be more than that. He's on the border of the possible enduring suffering in his body. But is that the greatest? He is forsaken by all around him. Those who once were searching for him now do not even look unto him. He's alone. Is that his greatest suffering? There are the people that he describes were not worth that he should give them a job, that now come and mock him. Those in which character would be not worth anything, they now come and mock him all around. He became a mockery for those that are around him. But is this the greatest suffering? And then he has his friends there, and they accuse him of being one who was unfaithful to God. They come, they want to show sympathy, but in the end, all they express is accusations. Yes, this adds to his all other sufferings, and it makes his situation even more worse if he would just have a physical suffering, if he would just be left by his friends, if he would just be mocked by those with a questionable character and accused by those who come obviously to help him. Would that all be the greatest pain? Would that make Job to express his suffering as he did it, and we will read it soon? it would not be enough. Because there is something in a man of God that does not equal with all the suffering that we enumered here. And that's his relationship to God. Here is Job that lived a life with God. He was connected to him as strong as a man could be connected. And now, where is he? Why does he crush him unjustly? He has done nothing. Why is he doing this to me? Why is he presenting himself as suddenly being my enemy? Until now, he was my friend. Until now, I could access to him, and he said, "Here I am." And now, he is my enemy. And he hides himself. When I go searching for the right, I don't find him. I go to the left, I don't find him. He wails himself. He does not answer. So imagine you live a life with God. You're on with him. And then overnight, it stops. It is the same thing that happens in humans when they lose their love source. You see, every one of us need to be bound to something. And we either are bound to humans or animals, or we are bound to God. Now, when we are bound to a human and that passes away, we are desolated. Because that was our source of love. That were where we were bound to. But Job proved that he was not bound to any humans or animals. He lost all his animals. He lost all his children, 10 children in a day. And it didn't crush him. It didn't destroy him, because he said, I am bound to God. God is sufficient to me. That's all I need. God gave, God took. I'm fine with it. And then he becomes sick by the agent of the devil, not by his own thoughts. And what now? And in his sickness, he is cut off from God. And this is what brings all people, when they are cut off from their love source, into despair. Now Job had the right love source. Job was not bound to anything earthly that could be taken away from him. And generally, God cannot be taken away from you. And here it is that he's gone. And this is the greatest suffering that any human can have. When he is bound to the right source, like Christ, and that source is cutting you off. And then it's like someone takes away the air. You must despair. This is what brings Job out to speak. And here he starts his discourse. He has many things to say, but there are 3 general blocks. I put them together that Job expresses in his discourse. He expresses the greatness of his suffering. He puts his questions to God. And he dialogues with his friends about certain matters. So his expression of suffering is general. It goes to anyone. It goes towards God. It goes towards his friends. Then he has questions that doesn't go through his friends, that just go to God. And then he speaks to his friends who have good ideas towards him, but they are of no help. So we start with Job's lamentation. We start with this, what he starts to say in his first starting speech in chapter 3. After this, opened Job his mouth and cursed his day. And Job spake and said, Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, There is a man-child conceived. Let that day be darkness. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined unto the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the month. Lo, let that night be solitary. Let no joyful voice come therein. Let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. Let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark. Let it look for light, but have none, neither let it see the dawning of the day. Because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor did sorrow from mine eyes. That's an introduction, and I want to use a few words to this introductory lamentation. You see, the book of Job and many books of the Bible are written in a language, in words that express pictures. And you know, pictures cannot be changed in time because they are using those things which are general. Words are subject to change. Pictures not. The night is the night. But what is he expressing with the night? So, God in his all wisdom knew that we, after thousands of years, would read this book. And it would be of a great help to us. But if he had written it in words that just express certain things, it would have not been transmitted its imagines to us, his pictures that it gives to us. So God gives us in words a picture of a suffering that is expressed in poetic language, in picture language. And this for our good, that we today might understand it. Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb of my mother? These are great expressions where you put death higher than life. Let's read how it continues. Why did the knees prevent me, or why did the breast, why the breast that I should suck? For now should I have lain still and been quiet. I should have slept. Then had I been at rest. Why kings and counselors of the earth which built desolate places for themselves, or with princes that had gold who filled their houses with silver, or as a hidden untimely birth I had not been, as infants which never saw light. There the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary be at rest. So Job describes that the place of death would be better than the place to live. And then further on he says, for the things I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. So, not that he lived in fear, it's just that what you never dreamed to happen to you, that come to you. That what you would never expect. Look, now you're in the midst of it. And then he goes on in chapter 6 by saying, oh, that my grief were thoroughly weighed, and my calamity laid in the balances together. For now it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words are swallowed up. This is an expression where he says, I am at the border of anything that I can suffer. The burden that I have is immeasurable great. Why? For the arrows of the Almighty are within me. My spirit drinks their poison. The terrors of God are arraigned against me. He is it who struck me. That it would please God to crush me. That he would loose his hand and cut me off. So Job is here, there where I think the border of all human suffering can be. He's there where Christ was at Gethsemane, where he had to take the decision, and where Christ was on the cross. At the border of all a man can bear. Not going over it, but there where there is just no space. If one little thing's add to it, you're crushed, you die. That's where Job is. That's how he expresses it. And I'm very thankful for Job's expression of his suffering. You see, the expression of suffering, we sometimes interpret, like his friends also, that it is a lack of faith. No. When you say it hurts, is that sin? When you express something that is present and is real, should that be sin? Of course not. Job did not sin while expressing his suffering. Then Jeremiah would have sinned as well, as he cursed the day of his birth. In the same manner, almost like Job expressed it. Then when Christ on the cross said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? When he expresses that pain, or when he said, I thirst, would that be a sign of doubt? A sign of lack of faith? Of course not. If I would have not have had this expression, and not only this, but in the whole book of Job, how he expresses his pain, I would not been able to understand the suffering of Christ on the cross. And I would not get a look inside that, what happens, what Christ did not express, but he had it there. He suffered it all. And I would not be able to prepare myself for the days to come, where you are in that close connection with God, and then he brings you in to that situation where you have to stand the tests. When God is cutting you off from him, apparently you are still in faith. That's the only way that sin is proven to be killed. That is the only way that you can prove that there is no doubt, no mistrust to God anymore. That's the final test. Job shows us the final test that Christ was in, and he shows us the final test that the people of God must go through in a short while. And it would be good to be prepared, to be then when you are in that cloud, when you don't see anything that you saw before you entered that cloud. You have still your memory. You have still your experience with God. And you might express your pain by, like Jesus describes this people, this elect in those days, they cried day and night to God. And he says, will he not listen to them? Of course. He will come to their help. But he will come to their help just in the moment where there should be the border of passing and die. But they will cry out like Job, day and night, in that suffering, in that cloud where they don't see any outcome. They saw it before they entered. They were happy with God like Job, in a full peace of mind with him. And then they enter the cloud. And then there is nothing, just darkness. Before they knew, at the end of the cloud, there comes the light again. But when you are in the midst of it, you don't see it. And then you will cry out. And the only thing that is there is your memory of the past, of your experience. Then you will remember, and I hope I will do it if the Lord finds me to go through that time as his child. Then I want to remember, and I want to say and cry out to God my suffering. That is not an expression of doubt, not an expression that I don't trust him anymore. It's just an expression that I am at the border of anything that a human being can suffer. Job had also questions on God, and I want to give an overview here. Then in the next hours we will go more into those questions. Job has questions to God, and he says, why did you crush me? I don't understand. I'm your friend. Why did you crush me? Why did you deliver me to the unjust? It's the same parallel when we read through that, what Job expresses to God. It is the same thing that you find for Christ, who was given in the hand of the unjust. Job knew that he was given by God in the hand of the unjust, and he did not understand it. Why? Because he was before Christ. Did Christ know it? Yes, he said it before. He said, I will be delivered in the hand of the evildoers. There in the garden at Gethsemane, he was in that fight of obeying God or not, taking the cup of his wrath, being delivered unjustly to the unjust. And he took the cup and he said, let's go out, because they come who will take me and they will do wrongly to me. Jesus knew it. Job didn't have that insight. Why, God, are you my enemy? Without a cause. You know, Job says at the end of his discourse, he says, if I would have had something that I should be punished for, then I would stand highly and I would accept everything. I would not come in any situation where I would go against it. I would just stand uprightly and suffer for what I did, because it would be just. It would be a cause. I would bear it, he said. It wouldn't be too much. But what was here too much was him. This God whom he trusts, is his enemy without a cause. Jesus knew in Gethsemane that God would be his enemy on the cross. Apparently, that has to take out sinful nature out of his humanity in that battle. And he knew it before. But when he was there, he had to resist that wrath of God, that it should take out anything left there that could possibly bring humanity to again distrust God. Christ knew why. Because he had that fight in Gethsemane. He knew it, and we will have the same thing. We will have to have a Gethsemane experience where we know what's coming in front of us, and we still go. We trust he will bring us through. Now then, after he came out of Gethsemane, his mind and his suffering left him, and he went very well until he hung on the cross, where the hour came that God was apparently his enemy, but he is just the enemy of sin, of sinful nature. Why are you silent? Why do you hide before me? Why do you not answer? And then, who am I in your eyesight? I am this little no one. How do you care for me? How can you think that my sin can harm you? Who am I? It's like a little ant would come to do you wrong. Now a little ant can bite me, but it cannot do me great things. But the comparison that Job does in this question to God says, I am not even an ant. All my sin, are they able to harm you? And then he puts that question, do you think like a man? Do you taste you? Do you judge like we judge? I mean, are you not greater than I am? Can it be that you judge like us? And then he, in his discourses, he describes the glory of God and the greatness of God in comparison with humanity. It's a fantastic description of God. It's a fantastic thing how Job sees him, God and himself, as that little creature that cannot even do God anything. And that's why he says, I can do you nothing and you still destroy me for nothing. Do you do this for the sins of my youth? So we will go deeper into that, but see these questions that he has to God. And these are the questions, of course, that we might express as well in our suffering in the time of trouble. Jesus just expresses, why hast thou forsaken me? But he knew the issue why. But just in that moment, he was so at that border of suffering that he had to cry it out. And I'm so thankful that he cried it out so that we might cry it out as well in that moment, even though we know why all this happened. Job didn't know that yet. He knew the plan of salvation, but he didn't know that he must go for a final test. And the plan of salvation has in it a final test for the people of God. That without this final test, salvation is not possible for humanity. So he had those questions, and we will know them in memory because we have studied the book of Job. We know the life of Christ, and we know what expects us. But then when we are in, we might express the same thing like Jesus, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And now comes a dialogue with his friends. And I put the topics that are dialogued there. And yes, the biggest topic is God's character, His righteousness, His greatness, and His wisdom. Those are the topics they talk about. But that which is most basic in all those topics, that's on the bottom of it, is God just? Is He just when He puts me in the hand of the unjust? Is God just? This is the question that the devil put at the beginning. Lucifer in heaven, is God just? Can we trust Him? And this is the question that is the question of all questions that we need to answer. And Job has the right answer to the justice of God. His friends don't. And then, of course, there is a vindication of his innocence. He wants to show that he has no sin anymore. And that's the question that is there. Can a man be just before God? And even in the English, it says, can a man be more just than God? Because that's what they express. We will see that in the discourse, the talk of Eliphaz. Can a man be just before God? They say no. Job says, I am just before God. Even though he knew he was a sinner, but he was a sinner that came out of sin. These are the main questions. If God is just, can He save a sinner? And can He make out of a sinner a just person? And it's the same discussion that we have today. It's nothing changed. We question God's righteousness and His justice. And Christianity and many people question even the bigger question because they are bound together. Can we ever become righteous before Him? Job proves, he vindicates that a man can be innocent before God. And God proves that. Christ came to this earth. He was born in a sinful nature, and He proved by the power of grace that He had from His Father that a man can be just before God. On the cross, where all sins were laid upon Him, that could not destroy Him because He was just. He was just. But in Him, it was needed to destroy the root of all evil, that is sinful nature. But the wrath of God did not destroy Christ on the cross. He did not die because of anything that He did wrong. He proves that a man can be just before God. And the last generation, the 144,000 in number, they will prove through the time of trouble that they are just before God. And they vindicate their own innocence that they had from a just God. They are one with Him. How should they not be just? So these two questions are greatly connected together, hardly even to get off. But in both cases, God is justifier, and He is the one that, and we are the one that by living with Him, like Job lived, like Christ lived, we can vindicate the justice of God, that a man can be just before God. While all the world says it's not possible. And then they discuss, of course, of the general state of the world. And Job says to his friends, look, you don't see it correctly. I see that the unjust in this world is well, and the just has to suffer. You say it's opposite. So who's right? And then there is a topic of the state of man in death. And here we want to pause a little bit. How could Job think that death is a place of peace and rest? Why? He has the description of death. We read it before, and I will go through this, that we might understand today what is death. Because people think they are immortal. People think that they don't die. They just are eternal beings that are impossible to be death. Something else that Job says. He says, it is the place where all that live on this earth will finally go. And he describes the place. He just not say we will all die. He describes it. And its description is so plenty, so overwhelming that all Christians should just see, oh, when I die, I sleep. I'm at peace. A place of peace and rest. No consciousness anymore, like in a sleep. Now in a sleep you might dream, but in death you don't have dreams. Jesus said, my friend Lazarus sleepeth. And if my friend Lazarus sleepeth, the disciple said, well, then it's well with him. But he did not speak about that sleep where you dream. He spoke about that sleep that is needed in the plan of salvation for grace's sake. Because in time, until the judgment, people cannot live all the thousands of years of this conflict, so they go into a state of rest until they get to the point of judgment at the resurrection day. The interesting thing is that in death, all are equal there. He says, if I would have been died like a unborn baby, I would be at rest together with the kings and the slaves, because there is no difference there between kings and slaves. If there is no consciousness, there is no difference between a dead king and a dead slave. They are there. He describes it like in a living world. He said, there is no difference. Rich and poor, they are the same in death. And how is it with the good and the evil? It's also the same. The good and the evil, they all have rest. And Solomon goes even a step further in his Ecclesiastes book, where he says, the animals, you are even equal with the animals in death. If there is no consciousness, if you just rest and sleep, what's the difference of the sleep of a king and the sleep of a slave? What is the difference of a rich man that sleepeth and the one that is poor? What is the difference of a good man or an evil man that sleepeth? There is no difference. He says there is no knowledge of God over there. No one knows God in death because they are sleeping. In sleepless, you have no knowledge. For we are food for worms, and the earth is covering us. There is no immortality of man, no rebirth, no cycle, no eternal cycle of being born and dying like many of billions of people on this earth believe it to be. It would be the greatest nonsense. Even though they have an explanation for it. You need more lives to become pure. No. The life of Job proves you don't need more life. The life of Christ that lived only 33 years and a half proves that righteousness can be made in a lifetime. And the 144,000, the weakest of all people, will prove that in a very short time of their lifespan. It takes years, of course. It takes preparation. No. There's no question about that. But it's possible in a lifetime. You don't need cycles and cycles of lives to purify. Because you cannot purify yourself. That's another question, another thing that people don't understand. So, Job knows that in death there is silence. But he also knows that there is a resurrection and the judgment. He knows that is in front of him. He knows that he will resurrect one day, and he knows that there's a wrath that comes before the resurrection. He said in Job 14:13, "Oh, that you would hide me in the grave, that you would conceal me until your wrath is past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me." In Isaiah, God says, "I will put the people to a rest until the wrath is going." God describes in Isaiah that many people before this last time, before this day of tribulation that comes upon all the earth, before the 7 last plagues, they will put to rest. God says, "I hide my people." They're only that people that can go through it, that number that he chose to go through that. All the other one he would hide in the grave until the wrath is past. He said, "Why don't you do that with me? If a man dies, shall he live again?" He puts that question and he says, "All the days of my hard service, I will wait till my change comes." Yes, I know there is a resurrection. "You shall call, and I will answer. You shall desire the work of your hands." And I would add to that, "and I will be there." It's not the only place. There are other places. I just take another one where Job expresses his faith in the resurrection and in the final judgment, where he says in Job 19:25, "For I know that my Redeemer liveth." This is in the midst of that being separated by God. He knows that he has a Redeemer, that lamb that he was sacrificing symbolically. Not understanding all of it, but he did it for himself when he was sinning, and he did it especially for his children. He called them because he said they might have done something in their youth. Now he was an adult. He knew what he's doing. But his children, he said, "I will sanctify them." He knows of that Redeemer, that he lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. That's the judgment time. He will raise up the one that comes to rescue me from the unjust pain, that rescue me from this thing. Oh, how beautiful would be that for those who are going through that time of trouble, to remember, "I know that my Redeemer liveth, and he will stand up and will come to redeem me. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God." In a human body I will see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not another's. How my heart yearns within me for this day, I would add. He knew a spirit has no eyes. That's why he has a body, and he, with his eyes, he will see God. So, let us conclude this lesson. We just start to enter into the theme of the discussions. But since there is the best time now to talk about death, I took that out so that we understand. And it should be clear for all who believe in the Bible that death is just a passing away situation. And death is a blessing for those who are in final state of cancer, for those who have in final state of suffering. They are just put to rest. They just sleep. Yes, they are eaten up by worms, their body, but their lives are hid in Christ. And when he shows up, they will show up as well. The resurrection, when he will call them, they will raise up by their name when he calls them. So we will continue to go deeper into these topics in his dialogue. We saw today the big expression of suffering, and let us never get into that judgmental situation where we, when someone expresses his pain, will say, "Oh, you are doing something wrong." The expression of pain is nothing wrong. The second, that we must go through a difficult time. This story of Job will help us to be prepared for that time of suffering. And we will know those that go to the time of trouble, they won't see death. They won't see that. They will go without going into that state of sleep. They will just be transformed. And I would like to be among them. How about you? Amen.